outside the dining hall and continued cataloguing ingots and other finds from the Cape Caledonia shipwreck, while Susan drew not only finds from the Byzantine wreck, but various types of pottery we collected from sponge divers. Thus began Peter Throckmorton's dream, a real museum. Once more assisted by young Dursun, Anne and Susan end their day's work and descend to the ruined castle, scarcely recognizable today. At the end they pass through this long, empty courtyard that is now a lush and popular tea garden shaded by immense trees. On our return to Turkey, in 1962 we decided the daily 4-hour commute was too tiring, that it ate too much into our productive time. So, even though there is no water on the Asiada, we built a camp of tents and buildings of stone, wooden uprights and mosquito netting with roofs of woven mats. Susan Woomer, the only single woman in 1962, had a tent to herself, as did George and Anne. But we men shared the dormitory, sleeping soundly. Sometimes not even the breakfast bell woke us, which led to a shout from George. With limited water, the morning shower was only a damp rag over your face. We later built a shade of woven palms to eat under, but in our earliest days in camp, we baked our brains under the sun all through breakfast. Living on the island allowed us to do so much more of our cataloging, object photography, and drawing at the site. From the year before, 1961, we had the most accurate site plan ever made of an ancient shipwreck. In the upper level were globular cargo amphitheaters, and below that were roof tiles and small finds from the ship's galley. In the third level, we had the first traces of a wooden hull. To map the wooden remains of the ship's hull more efficiently, George designed a step framework of angle iron to support 2 movable photographic towers. Eric Ryan's diagrams show how we plan to assemble it, over the wreck, and use it. Our daily commute to the diving barge is no longer 2 hours each way, but only a few minutes row. After breakfast, we pile into our dinghy for the quick trip. Once we reach the barge, the divers immediately begin their assigned tasks. Another change in 1962 was to hookah diving gear. The amount of air from the surface through a hose was unlimited, so we never ran out of air, as we sometimes did with tanks. Once on the seabed, diving archaeologists begin the assembly of the step frames, first driving in the pipe legs, then putting the angle iron frames on them, and lastly leveling the steps in place and tightening thumb screws to hold them tightly to their legs. To avoid damaging the fragile wood, we always removed our fins. Then we picked up stemmed identification labels and moved barefoot over the step frames above the wood. To prevent the bits of wood from floating away, we used hundreds of sharpened bicycle spokes to pin the hull remains to the seabed, like so many insects on a board. Much of the hull has now been uncovered and pinned down. We move up the slope over labeled planks and frames or ribs. The ship's keel is badly riddled with teredos or shipworms, and the bow of the hull, held out of protective sediment by a rock outcrop, has been completely devoured. The ship carried 11 iron anchors at its bow. 7 stacked on deck are now concreted together into a solid mass. A pair of bow anchors on either side of the hull remain in place. One of more than a dozen terracotta oil lamps that once lit the ship comes to light during the hull study. The lamps are of types common in Constantinople and the Black Sea area at the time. It's time for this dive to end. As chief diver, I give a signal for the divers to ascend. The sound carries clearly to the bottom, 120 feet below, and the divers begin their ascent as their tenders on the barge above reel in their air hoses. So that no time is lost between dives, those who have just reached the decompression stop remove their hooker harnesses and send them up to waiting divers on the barge, while they switch to a short air hose to complete their decompression. I check the diving roster to see who should be getting their equipment ready. The decompressing divers, however, have news of the wreck that they want to pass up to the next team. They ring the bell, which alerts those of us on the barge that the written message is all ready to be retrieved. It's my job to haul in the clipboard, read what is written, and transmit the news to David Owen, who can now dive. In this way, not a moment is lost between the successive dives. Diving is as precise as clockwork from breakfast till sundown. As decompressing divers pass the minutes by playing tic-tac-toe, David's team passes them on their way down. Their job is to map the hull remains from the photo towers that are slid over the step frame placed on the wreck. Once the tower is positioned, one of the team swims to its top, places the rolling marine camera into place, and photographs down through the tower's wire-gridded base. Elevation measurements are taken with plumb lines lowered from the tower bases, and even angles of pieces of wood are measured by means of a protractor and a vertical string buoyed by light bulb. As the summer draws to a close, it is time for all of the students to return to their universities. We swim up the airlift pipe for the last time and give the basket the last shake before closing camp and taking everything back to Bodrum for the winter. We decompress at the end of our last working dive, playing our last game of tic-tac-toe as the barge above continues to pitch gently in the swell. Like the stevedores who loaded the amphoras onto the Byzantine ship more than a millennium earlier, we now carry them from Yasiada and load them on Sanane for their trip to Bodrum. Captain Kemal carries amphoras across the courtyard that is today a popular cafe with hundreds of visitors, and, with others, enters the castle, passes through what is now a tree-shaded tea garden, and climbs higher through the ruins that are now restored, making this a museum visited by more than 250,000 people a year. In 1963 and 1964, we would return with the first methods of mapping the seabed with stereo photographs and the first commercially launched research submersible in America. Whereas in 1962, we knew only that we had completed another summer in safety and celebrated it with our only night dive, 120 feet deep, swimming over the Byzantine carpet.